Hello, everyone. Welcome to this week's episode of ClueCon Weekly. Joining us this week is Neciu from CareerOS, co-founder, engineer, and a lot of other things, and an expert in software development. Thank you for joining us today, Dan.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
Would you like to give us a quick introduction about yourself, please?
Sure. So I'm originally from Romania, Bucharest, but around 3 years ago, I moved to Barcelona in Spain to take advantage of the wonderful weather. Um, I've been working as a engineer and programmer for around 12 years. I've started doing a lot of WordPress sites, front end, back end, mostly PHP and JavaScript. Then I moved into this more front end role, and I started a lot with CSS. The framework started coming out, so Angular 1, then Angular 2, Vue, and now my favorite personally, it's React. And um, it's the one I chose when I bootstrapped my company. Um, we have everything done in React. So yeah, that's about me more or less.
Oh, well, yeah. There's a lot going on in front end and people getting started. There's a lot of work around what front end is and what isn't. So having an expert around, we don't often have someone. We very often have people talking about the back end side of things, servers and
Yeah.
protocols and compression. So I have so many questions to ask you, but the first one is going to be very blunt. Do you always need a large front end framework in your opinion when you do a project? Like, does that always bring value?
I don't think so. So sometimes it's counterproductive for sure. Like uh, some time ago, I had to do uh, I was consulting on a project, and they had to do a simple, um, let's say, uh, little game where they recorded themselves and a video played in the background, a sort of like a filter that you have like on Snapchat or Instagram, stuff like that, but in the browser. And someone did it, and they used Next.js. They just implemented the design using a framework without the logic behind it. And to implement the recording and everything, it was so troublesome to pass down the events, and having just a simple HTML file with pure JavaScript would have been so much easier when you're dealing with like native browser API than having a big framework, which will probably make you slower in the short run and the long run.
Yeah, it really depends on where. Also, I think team size matters. There is many people say they are full stack developers, but the reality is that it's very hard to be a full stack at scale.
Yeah.
It's the
What does that even mean? It's like, do you know Kubernetes? Do you do front end, back end, data? Full stack is too heavy right now.
yeah, it's
It's
too
basically to be a full stack, you have to be an entire organization.
correct. Yeah. Plus, on the there's an example we bring up. I come from the other side of the barricade, right? Systems, DevOps, scaling, and I've seen customers app a few months ago where they were running a simple WordPress with a few pages on top of it, but they were running that on
Mhm.
Kubernetes. It had 18 pods to run a WordPress application. Like aside from
Wow.
being $180 per month, it was just so much overkill, and they didn't know how to fix the problem. It was too complicated, and they had a problem with the certificate not renewing, HTTPS, and
Oh,
they
yeah.
didn't know how to fix it because it was too big. Like, where is it in that 18 pods, the one that's giving you the problem? So let's start small. So, well, first question. Well, what's CareerOS, which looks like it's a very interesting project, and I want to know more about it. So, what do you do? What do you offer?
So, my co-founders, two amazing guys named Marcus and Max, they just graduated 2 years ago from a business school, and they found out that, you know, how do they get jobs, right? They have this huge problem on their hands that they're fresh graduates and they finish business school, but they don't know how to actually apply to jobs. And the school helped them a lot teaching them around business and around that, but they didn't know how to do, I mean, of course they can go on LinkedIn and apply directly, but they found out that usually they don't hear back when this happens. So they came up with this idea of the CareerOS, which is an app specifically designed for students to help them navigate the busy world that is basically applying to jobs, and networking in general. So yeah, I took that idea and, um, with another co-founder, Alexei, who's more on the backend side, we created this app that helps you network. For example, you're a student at a school, you sign up, you say you want to work at Amazon, and we recommend you people to reach out on
Wow.
LinkedIn, and we give you templates on what to say, and we really bring this sales enablement technique and framework to the job hunting process.
And is
Yeah.
it just for students, or does it support non-students too?
No, for now it's just for students because we're selling directly to universities. So
Oh, I
it's
see.
exclusive to universities. So yeah.
Well, still very, very interesting. I mean, it's a super. It's a it's something that you don't see very often. I mean, we very often focus on teaching people at university. You learn things you need to work. For example, in
Yeah.
our field, we learn how to program and how
Yeah.
to set a database and networks and all of the other stuff. But nobody ever teaches you how to find a job. That's fun, but it's actually very true.
Yeah.
They
And
send you
they
out there.
and it's like, for us, they don't teach you how to navigate the software world, like the politics surrounding the team structures. They don't teach agile development in college.
Hmm. Speaking of which, you are very much an agile expert and someone who knows a lot of patterns. And
Sure.
first of all, I think agile is as relevant as it was years ago, but somehow I feel like I'm hearing agile mentioned less. Do you have the same
Mm,
feeling? Like, is it,
a
are the
little
young
bit.
people feeling like it's an old thing? Weirdly enough.
I think, there's this, a little bit of hate towards agile because of estimations. Of
Mhm.
course, agile is not just that, but when you hear agile, people immediately think, ah, we have to create stories, estimate them, put them in the
Points,
sprint
points.
points, exactly. And then, you know it gets a lot of hate for that, but I think it's still very much relevant, and people use it without maybe even knowing it's called agile. They know they have to do a retrospective on a sprint. Everyone knows what sprints are, more or less. Jira is everywhere. Like, they just bought Loom, I think, or this huge video recording company for 8 billion or something. So yeah, it's still there, maybe hidden. They don't talk that much about agile, but everyone uses it, in my
Yeah,
opinion.
yeah, we everybody. I mean, the point system maybe not so much, but the thing about sprints and being able to. What I think people should get from my favorite thing about being agile is always have something that works.
Yeah.
Like keep delivering small steps alongside the road so you can show people. And more importantly, my favorite thing when I was a consultant is that if you manage to release often, you manage to keep rework to a minimum. Because
Yeah.
if something is not correct, they will tell you now. They will not tell you 6 months from now when you have to redo it. That is very, very, very important. Another thing I see you use a lot, and I think you've spoken about. So I'm very curious. What is domain-driven development?
So it's sort of like, a way to structure your code, so it satisfies business needs immediately. So the main idea is, usually what happens is developers name their variables, that methods, something that they think matters,
Mhm.
but it's not really correlated one-on-one with what the business does, right? When you name something order in your, a model in your application, it maybe not be what the business think an order is. Like marketing may think something, uh, some other department might see another name for order that is important. And in domain-driven design, usually you create this ubiquitous language between all business departments and development and engineering, so you have exact everything named the same,
Mhm.
and then you code this. Basically, you create boundaries between these business models that you created. So for example, an order is, you know what it is, you know what it's supposed to be done, and then you code the order model, and it's isolated, basically a microservice. That would be an ideal situation, right? You create a microservice that only handles the order model, and then it has different techniques that you can apply or to communicate with this pattern.
Good. So it's a way to make software work like a business in a sense, work like the business is describing. It's
Yeah, I think the main idea is you identify what changes often in your business. You see, like if you're an e-commerce company, where do you make the most changes? Probably somewhere on the product page or somewhere around the product. Yeah. If you create the cart, you probably are not going to change that. You made it in the beginning, the checkout, and it's going to stay the same probably. Uh, if
yeah.
you won't change it every month, but on the product you're still gonna, or on the catalog, you're gonna change it probably very often. So the idea is to isolate this domain, make it like a core domain that you're gonna change often, and apply these patterns to make it as easy changeable as possible, because that's what we want, to iterate fast.
Do you think those have so there's an overlap between that and test driven development, or are they two different things?
No, they're different. Like you can apply both at the same time, right? The TDD mentality is that you write code first, you write your test scenarios as you code and not afterwards. Um, but it would usually help to have the same thing. It's sort of like when we had BDD, which is like business driven development,
Yeah.
and you wrote like Gherkin style test cases that satisfy business situation, more or less.
Right. A cucumber in Ruby, but it's the same thing. Yeah,
Yeah,
they're all related. You're right. Yeah, that's not something you do anymore. It's
yeah, yeah.
just going to the
It's
wayside a little.
it's because of fads, right? TDD is more popular than BDD and stuff like
In our,
that.
in our experience, though, the BDD problem was that to write, you either had tests written by people that were too high level, so they weren't
Mhm.
testing much, or you had to have technical knowledge to write the behavior tests, the Gherkin tests. So it
Mhm.
actually would be better to just write, RSpec or whatever, and write the real code tests directly. it's
Yeah.
a it's a middle ground that doesn't really work because people that they're not programmers, they don't want to program. It's even hard to find someone who will write you a Gherkin test that they're not a programmer. So it sort of didn't work out. At least that's our feeling. Blunt question: do we do TDD?
Um, right now, no. You're in this startup um, environment, and you sort of code fast. And TDD, you need a little bit of time to think. It's better. I personally believe I should use it, and sometimes I feel I see where the code is missing some edge cases that I might have caught using TDD. But yeah, I'm not using it right now. In my previous company, we were using it. We were pair programming a lot and using TDD to write the code, which was really good, I think.
That is a common thing I hear from people on the front end. So maybe there's a way to make front end tests better. Because on the back end, I am actually not faster if I don't write tests. In fact, on the back end, I'm slower because I have to write the backend code, go to the browser, refresh the Rails application, and see if it works or not. Well, I can code for a day without seeing a Rails page. And when I'm done, the web application actually works, but that's for the backend. So maybe there's just something to improve in the tooling on the
Yeah.
front end testing. It's actually harder. Another thing, I don't know if, yeah, that's a good question. When you're testing front end applications, do you do unit style testing, so you're testing the logic, or do you also like those larger tests where you have a test that you tell, press the button that says connect, check for an element with the class of connected to appear, and the element with the class of connected has to have a text saying you are connected now? Do you write those kind of tests, or is it even something somebody actually does?
Yeah, we used to do it quite a lot actually. So the normal is to write unit tests at the story level, let's say a task level. So you have a small task to implement. You write TDD style unit test. You try to write your code and your PRs to be as small as possible. So your code reviewers can see it fast. Um, so the pipeline would also run fast. And this was the goal, like at the task level. But when you have a big feature that is composed of little small tasks, we would also implement like an end-to-end test that checks that the feature works in production. Well, not in production, but in the pipeline itself. What we were doing was actually we were mocking the backend because we didn't want to check every time with the make request at every PR to make requests to a real backend service and consume resources. So what we were doing is the first request that we couldn't find in our cache, we went and got the backend, and then we saved it in like a service worker or a Redis somewhere that is we just cached it like a simple JSON. And this like helped us a lot with the time we spent um, mocking end-to-end tests. But yeah, we were doing both, and I think when you have a complex application that is being used by millions of users, you really need this end-to-end test to protect basically your production from
From
mistakes. Yeah, from us.
me
We
and
had
you.
we had like 50 or 40 front-end engineers in my previous company, and we were breaking it quite often until we implemented these end-to-end tests.
Yeah, I think that's actually the maximum value I can see from UI based tests are the end to end. We have 50 or 60, not more, end to end tests we run after every major deploy. That is, can a user sign up? Can they put in a credit card on their account?
Exactly. Yeah.
And all of those have made us sleep much better because you almost never have big problems. Because if you cannot buy, in our case, if you cannot buy a phone number, it can mean many things. It doesn't necessarily have to be that the button JavaScript is broken in React. Maybe it's in the backend, right? But at least it tells you, like, hey, right now you cannot buy a phone number. Go check it. And it is a very, very important thing. So maybe those are not test-driven things, but those are tests you should write after you've done with the
After,
platform.
yeah, for sure. These are like the after tests that you write, and they're very, very important. In my previous, we had I think 20 only, right?
Yeah,
The main user flows, but they give you the most confidence. You can sleep way better at night.
yeah, we have a lot of APIs that are very technical. So some of them need a separate test. That's why there's more. But 60 tests isn't a lot. The main
No.
application has 4 or 5,000 unit tests to put things into perspective, because that's what you
Yeah.
need when you're using testing. Speaking of which, good question. What do you do with CI and CD right now? And what's your favorite best practice?
So we're using GitHub Actions basically to every time we run a PR, we build the application. We have to make sure that it's buildable. This front end application needs to build first and foremost. Then we run the linter to make sure there are no basic errors, like you missed a comma somewhere, or naming practices or accessibility practices. So we run the code through this in the pipeline. We build it. We run the unit tests if we have some. Then we build the storybook. We keep all our uh, components and design tokens inside storybook. We build it, and a designer can verify the PR because they're not that technical. You don't want them to download the code and boot it up. So they use this. We set up a link for them, so the CI pipeline builds a preview link, and they can check the application, they can check the storybook to give their approval. And then once the PR is merged, we push this to we create an image to be used in Kubernetes, in Docker. So we push it in a repository, an image repository. I think we were using Quay or something. And then this gets pushed into the production application.
Yeah, that looks like a very very good pipeline. It's not everybody has something that's that good, so that really sounds nice. And so yeah, buildable part is what's important. So of course, for people who don't know, continuous integration means you're always running tests while you develop, and continuous deployment means as soon as you have a production ready commit that passes tests, you automatically deploy. That's something that people are very afraid of at the start.
Yes.
Did you have to convince your co-founders to use CI and CD, or were they technical enough to know what it was?
We didn't have to do it. I think me and Alexei, the backend developer, had this mentality from the start. We know it was a good practice, so we integrated. Plus, it's very easy to do it nowadays. It's not that you have GitHub Actions, you have templates already written for you. It's super, super simple, right? You can integrate it with Google Cloud very easily.
Yeah,
I
when
mean,
you deal with your own Jenkins and your own Git hooks and your own test environment, and when tests were failing, you never knew why. Like, is it
yeah,
because they're narrowing my code, or is it the wrong Ruby version in my case?
exactly. Yeah.
Then you find out it's passing on your machine because you have the right Ruby version, but online there's a different one, and it doesn't work. But it's not your fault. It is the. It is not easy to. It is indeed not easy to learn. Well,
Yeah.
speaking of tooling, etc., how do you feel React is doing right now? Is it still the main player in the JavaScript arena? Is there something coming up? Should people learn React these days?
There are some really cool things coming up, but I don't think they're at that level yet. React is still the main MVP in the JavaScript world for sure. They have a couple. We have some cool new frameworks right now, like Quick, which sort of solves performance differently than React does, which is very interesting. And it's built by the same guy who built Angular,
Oh,
which is also pretty cool. Um, then we have this new, uh, let's say, trend coming up now in the front end world to server side render everything. So there are these new frameworks that do this, like Next.js. You have Astro, which sort of comes with a really cool thing like islands, where they hydrate just part of your app, not everything. So the entire front end world now is super, super focused on making apps render fast. So and it's cool to see how each and everyone has a different way to do it. Like even React now is coming up with React Server Components, which is basically code that you can write on the server, which was what we had before 10 years ago. But the way they're doing it now, it's sort of interesting.
Yeah, that's a good point. Like server side rendering. We had that in 1999, guys.
Yeah,
It was called
exactly.
PHP and everybody hated it. Oh,
It's
but listen,
exactly
PHP is not very
PHP.
strong. Like we have many customers using PHP. I
No,
didn't even
no,
know.
still.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a
And even I was still using PHP, like the framework Laravel, very popular. Everyone is using it. It was coming by default with Vue installed, so you can use Laravel as a REST API, and you can build your views using Vue. It was really cool.
yeah, it is actually quite. It's actually quite good. Again, everybody. It's kind of a running joke in the programming industry, about PHP. But the reality is that it's the language. You can write terrible code in JavaScript too.
Anything, yeah.
You've seen horrible code in JavaScript for sure, and or Golang, even the ones that people say are almost impossible to get wrong, like Golang. You can definitely get it wrong. It's not too hard.
True,
Yeah,
true.
there's a lot in.
Golang is pretty cool though. We're using Golang for our backend. It's pretty
Super
simple, I
fast,
think. Super, super fast. Yes,
very
and it
self-contained, great
yeah,
environment.
and it integrates really well with Google Cloud. Like you can see it's made by Google and how they apply their design patterns. It's really cool.
Yeah, it is a first class citizen for sure. They certainly have that as their main language. Although Google does a lot of Python too, I think.
Yeah, yeah, they do. They do.
So, last question: have you ever used React Native? You think that's a good platform for people who are in React to branch out to mobile development?
So I did actually. I built a couple of apps.
Mhm.
I think React Native is still not there yet
No.
in terms of usability and developer experience. But there's this new framework on top of React Native called Expo,
Hmm,
uh,
heard of
which
that.
basically uh, helps you with the building process, helps you deploy directly to the stores, which is a big hassle. If you are not coding natively in Xcode or Android Studio, uh, it's pretty difficult to deploy to the stores. But Expo handles this for you, and they already have like a router, so you can have screens. It's pretty easy to build a mobile application using Expo, and inside of it is React. So except the you don't have HTML, obviously you have to use the native views like view, text, image, but it's really really easy to use, and I would definitely recommend it if you want to build a mobile app. Use React Native with Expo, super fast.
And they even have a cloud service for builds, and
Exactly.
so you don't have to. Because very often I've played with it, and getting to the point where you have an application running in your simulator is not hard. Like you can do.
No, no.
That's when the difficult part starts. Like getting into the store is a complicated part.
Yeah, the problem that I found with the Expo simulator is it's basically it wraps your app and then it turns it on in the browser. So if you're like used to use browser APIs, like if you wanna use local storage, for example,
Mhm.
in the simulator, it's gonna work because it's still in the browser. But
Oh,
once you build it and then you open it on your mobile, it's gonna crash because there's no local storage there. And they still don't have this, um, let's
I
say, gatekeepers. So it will warn you like, hey, you're using local storage. In mobile development, there's no such thing. Maybe you shouldn't. Yeah.
I guess it is difficult to override browser components. So like local storage, you can probably do window dot local storage equals whatever, and then whenever you call a method, just throw an error in the console.
Yeah. Yeah.
I wonder if
But
anybody's done it. That sounds like a good open source project to start.
yeah, I've actually also used Ionic, which is like the Angular version of a hybrid app. Um, it's basically you write the same thing as an Angular app. It's one on one. It and I think if you don't need to use stuff from the native phone, like location or stuff like that, or have access to the hardware, it's way easier to build an application using Ionic than React Native, for example. And it's pretty popular.
And what are the differences? Just so, is React Native more integrated? Is it, or is it just how you develop, and in the end, they're all result in the same thing?
So React Native actually builds. You write React code, but then it takes your code and it compiles it into native C or Swift code, basically, depending on the application, right? While Ionic, it's like a hybrid. It's called a hybrid app. So it more or less wraps your app in a view, in a web view. So what it's actually delivering at the end, it's an application that it's a basic iframe for a web. So it still has web elements there. You're not building native application, more or less. You cannot access native features from the mobile.
Oh, I see. Yeah, you're right. So if you want to use native features, assuming you can, there are plugins that expose
There
the
are, yeah.
gap between in the JavaScript application. You're right. It's slightly different. Well, it's we have SignalWire has a React Native SDK that's managed by their own team. Again, I come from the Kubernetes land and Docker land, so I thought I should learn some front end. This is something that out of left field, but I want to ask you: have you heard of HTMX? The little framework that effectively allows you to do server. So it's replacing everything with server-side rendering. Like
I've heard about it. I've not used it myself, but I've seen that Twitter is divided on the issue, like Twitter is.
That's why I'm asking. I've seen a couple wars break out over the HTMX. So it comes from, Phoenix as live view, Rails as action cable. There are a few similar items in the market. I'm not super convinced because every time I tried doing something complicated with those frameworks, it ended up doing things like, double binding events. So you'd click a button and it would do the thing twice, or losing events, binding, etc. I don't know. It's probably too much. Like probably works if what you're trying to do is, I don't know, paginate the list. You have 15 voices on the screen. You want the next 50. That's probably great. But the more complicated stuff, you need React for sure.
Or smaller frameworks.
Smaller frameworks. Well, yeah. So let's close on that. If someone is intimidated by React size, what do you recommend someone starting from when you're, say, I want to learn some front-end development. I am a very good back-end and DevOps developer. Where do I start?
Yeah, I think basic JavaScript for sure. It does have a lot of gotchas that might be hard to understand at the beginning. I personally loved working with jQuery 10 years ago, and I think it helped me understand a lot about events, binding events, how the DOM works, which was very easy for me to understand React coming from a jQuery background. But for sure, I think that the easiest framework right now is Angular, because it's very opinionated, so it doesn't let you make mistakes. So it gives you everything, like a service, a router, everything you absolutely need, and the tutorials are really good. So if you want to build
one way to do the thing, so it's harder to do it wrong.
Exactly. And
you know what? I'm gonna go read an Angular tutorial right after the podcast. I'm very curious at this point. Yeah. And jQuery, I always joke that one way you can get yourself hurt is going to a React convention and asking someone, "Hey, so what was wrong with jQuery?" Then you have to start running. It used to work.
That's true. It used to work pretty good, pretty good.
Yeah, there's a couple of dishes that are maybe was big, like it was a big framework. That's probably the main thing, and it did too much overriding of stuff in the browser. But it
Yeah,
was so it is. It's weird how well I think jQuery is still like on 60% of the websites in the world or something like that.
probably. Yeah.
Yeah, is
I think the big issue it was that it didn't help you isolate components. This is what all the frameworks are doing now, right? You have a button component, you can reuse it everywhere, so it helps with isolation and reusability, which you didn't have in jQuery. You had a big file and you did everything there.
oh, absolutely. I have to say I still do that in vanilla JavaScript too, but I need to get better at it. So I'll go check out Angular because I really want to learn some decent front end. Well, Dan, thank you for joining us today. It was a pleasure.
Thank you for having me, Luca, and really cool questions.
We didn't often have someone who's a front end expert, so I try to ask you as many questions as came up. And if I have more, maybe we'll do a new episode a few months in. So we'll get
Sure.
there. I'll tell you how it went with Angular too.
Amazing. Thank you.
So then Neciu joining us he's the technical lead at CareerOS. Go check out the websites. If you're a student, it's incredibly cool and it's a service to navigate your career. And I wish I had that when I started out, instead of ending out at the big four, I won't name, at a big four consulting company for 4 years and being bored for 4 years until I just went and became a telephony developer. So go check out CareerOS. And thank you, Dan, for joining us today.
Thank you, Luca. See you soon.
For the rest of the people, I'll see you next week. Goodbye.